you ever looked at a perfectly curated TikTok or Instagram aesthetic and wondered, is it really sustainable or is it just another trend in disguise? Meet Underconsumption Core, the latest anti-consumerist movement to sweep the internet. But is it actually different from minimalism, or is it just minimalism rebranded in Gen Z lingo? And most importantly, is it a good thing, or is it just another underdeveloped trend that's more about impression than real impact? Hey there, and welcome back to Sustainable Jungle. This is Amber, here to talk sustainability tips, tricks, hacks, products, brands, and stories to better our planet. If that sounds like your vibe, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons down below so you don't miss any of our deep dives into the latest sustainability topics and trends. And the trend that I want to talk about today is Underconsumption Core. What is Underconsumption Core? So, just in case you're not super well versed on internet lingo and culture, guilty. Tacking on the term core is a somewhat common new-ish internet trend. In internet culture, core is basically a suffix that's used to define aesthetic or lifestyle movements. It stems from hardcore, and it's commonly attached to words that describe specific trends or vibes that people gravitate towards. So each core embodies a set of visuals, values, and ideas. For example, cottagecore romanticizes rural and countryside living, focusing on activities like baking, gardening, and wearing vintage-style clothing. It's all about creating a cozy, nature-connected atmosphere, whereas goblincore, which is apparently a big thing, embraces a more messy and earthy side of life, with a love for mushrooms, trinkets, and all things kind of wild and unpolished. Underconsumption core, then, essentially romanticizes the idea of not consuming things. That means consciously buying less, owning less, and rethinking the relationship that we have with material possessions. It's positioned as a direct rebellion against hyper-consumerism, the culture of more is more that fast fashion and haul videos have perpetuated for years. Sounds pretty much like minimalism, right? Well, here's the twist. Unlike traditional minimalism, which often focuses on clean, neutral aesthetics and a one-size-fits-all ideology, Consumption Core kind of leans into Gen Z's love for individuality, irony, and chaos. So think mismatched thrift store outfits, clutter that's curated to look intentional, and a lot of secondhand or repurposed items. The hashtag Consumption Core has been trending all across TikTok, especially where creators are documenting their secondhand outfits, upcycled home decor, and even their anti-haul shopping trips. The vibe is gritty, quirky, and unapologetically imperfect. Now, one of the standout aspects of this trend is how it is resonating with Gen Z because of these characteristics. Because this is a generation that's already really hyper aware of the climate crisis, so they are definitely pushing back against that consumerism that has helped driving it. A recent Pew study found that 76% of Gen Zers are worried about climate change, and 37% of them are saying it is their biggest concern of all. So for many who have those attitudes, Consumption Core feels like a natural trend signifying a collective mental state born of the sheer exhaustion of consumerist culture. Because frankly, even if we're not among those who are buying these things, it is exhausting to be constantly bombarded with ads and microtrends and this pressure to buy everywhere we go. And as this article puts it right here, we're tired of influencers. So instead of buying into fast fashion and these utterly absurdly gratuitous influencer hauls that we're seeing on every corner of the internet, Underconsumption Core encourages participants to focus on thrift shopping, swapping clothes with friends, or simply making do with what's already in their wardrobe. It's less about what's new and more about what's necessary, which is great, right? So, let's talk some numbers here. The TikTok videos currently tagged at the time of this filming Underconsumption Core have garnered millions and millions of views. Some creators have amassed tens of thousands of followers by promoting this lifestyle. It's clear that the reach is pretty significant, and especially as conversations around climate change and ethical consumption and just sustainability in general become more and more mainstream, it continues to grow. And it's already garnered plenty of attention on corners of the internet that are not TikTok as well. So Google searches for Underconsumption Core surged by 1,150% around the end of summer of 2024, which is when this trend really started taking root. Now, on a practical level, Underconsumption Core manifests in a variety of ways, some of which we've already talked about, like thrift shopping, which has kind of become the cornerstone of this trend, the secondhand movement in general. And the goal of it is to find unique, affordable pieces that don't contribute to the demand of new production. Another big thing that's related to the idea of thrifting and secondhand is upcycling, and this is where creativity with the movement kind of comes into play. So instead of discarding discarding old items, people are finding ways to repurpose them. Think DIY furniture made from discarded pallets or turning an old shirt into a trendy tote bag. There's also anti-hauls, which I briefly mentioned before, and this is a direct response to haul culture, which is popularized by influencers, and we've talked about it before. So if you want to know a little bit more about haul culture specifically and why it's bad, go check out our other video on that. In response to that, anti-hauls basically focus on highlighting what not to buy. These videos are often a critique of consumer trends, and they encourage viewers to think critically about their purchases before they make them. Now, that all sounds great, right? I mean, these are all basic tenets of sustainability that we promote here at Sustainable Jungle all the time. So what's the issue with this trend, and is there even one at all? Well, as this one comment I found on another YouTube video on the topic says, I feel like this trend is normal, everyday things I thought everyone does. And I can't help but agree. And yes, I recognize that I might be in my own little echo chamber here because this is Sustainable Jungle, so a lot of our followers and things that I choose to consume personally are sustainability minded. So for those of us in these circles, it seems painfully obvious. But maybe for those outside sustainability circles who are just trying to start living more sustainably, it really is challenging for people to rethink consumption habits. But obviously it's hard to measure the real impact of internet trends like this. So let's get to the nitty-gritty and talk about some of the criticisms of this movement. So as much as Underconsumption Core has gained traction as an anti-consumerist movement, is this trend genuinely sustainable, or is it just another aesthetic masquerading as eco-consciousness? Now, there's no denying that Underconsumption Core has really good intentions, as we've mentioned before. It's rooted in really basic sustainability concepts. Reducing waste, reusing what we own, rejecting overproduction are all steps in the right direction. But the trend is not without its flaws. For example, some critics argue that people are adopting the look of underconsumption without fully actually embracing its principles. Thrifting and upcycling, for example, are great in theory, but just as I talked about in my other recent video on thrift hauls, when participants buy secondhand items that they don't need just to fit this vibe that they're going for, it kind of defeats the purpose. There's a really fine line between promoting conscious consumption and glorifying the aesthetic of conscious consumption, which can actually have the inverse effect and perpetuate the cycle of unnecessary consumption even more. Its inherent focus on aesthetics, I think, also inherently makes it exclusionary to certain lifestyles. Like, I, for one, have lived on the extreme end of minimalism. Before I moved where I live now, I was a van lifer, so I lived in a self-converted cargo van for almost 2 years, where literally every single thing that I owned fit in that van, the only exception being a box of keepsakes at my mom's house. So, believe me when I say that I know a thing or two about living with only the bare necessities. And you know what? A lot of the time, it is not aesthetic. Even today, my house is not under consumption core. I live in a 400 square foot tiny house where I run 2 businesses out of, so arguably it is more sustainable than any of these giant houses that successful influencers have, but because it is my house and my studio and my office and my greenhouse and my quail brooding space and whatever else I need it to be, it's a funky little place, and it is never going to look like this carefully, cute, curated, unconsumptive space, even though the majority of the things in it are sustainable or secondhand or upcycled or whatever other values I have. So even though Underconsumption Core does value chaos to an extent, it definitely does not value it to the extent that my house looks like it. Because here's the thing, sustainability looks like different things for different people. Are you a mom trying to raise kids sustainably? I'm not a mom, but I know kids are super messy, so I'd hazard a guess that your house does not scream Underconsumption Core. But that doesn't mean that you aren't living as sustainably as possible within the confines of your own particular lifestyle and needs. My point is that trying to put sustainability into one little aesthetic box is not particularly helpful for many of us. Another critique I've seen people make about this is regarding the accessibility of the movement. So minimalism in general has often been critiqued, just as being out of reach for many people, especially those who can't afford to replace their possessions with high-end minimalist alternatives. And while Consumption Core feels more flexible, messy, and dare I say fun, with a little bit less focus on the polished minimalist products, it is still important to remember that not everybody has access to quality thrift stores or the time to DIY their way to an Underconsumption Core lifestyle. This also raises questions about whether the movement's ideals are truly inclusive or if they are inadvertently creating a new form of gatekeeping within sustainability. According to one person that I saw online, Underconsumption Core is still ignorant of the fact that many of us simply don't live like TikTok influencers in real life anyway. And because while Underconsumption Core is an aesthetic, an underconsumption as an act is not. but being able to choose to consume or not consume in a certain way is a privilege that not everyone has, especially considering that 65% of Americans are now living paycheck to paycheck. For example, one thing I saw when watching videos under this tag was somebody bragging about being under consumption core because they didn't update their iPhone. And I couldn't help but be like, congratulations? I mean, I'm not upgrading my phone because I finally paid almost $1,000 last year for a new one after rocking an iPhone 8 for like 7 years. And I can't afford to spend another $1,000 on one just because it shoots reels in 20,000K or insert ridiculous camera spec here. And I think this is the core issue with Underconsumption Core for me. It's making an aesthetic out of something that's not a choice for many people. Like, I'm not buying the latest iPhone because it's chic to do so. I'm doing so because I can't afford to do otherwise. I mean, also screw planned obsolescence and greedy tech giants, obviously, but still. Finances are still the primary reason for most of us making a lot of these decisions. Some people have jokingly taken to calling this recession core influencing, and as one person I saw joked on TikTok, underconsumption core, but it's actually the reality of living under the poverty line. Now, a lot of the things that these influencers are doing to meet underconsumption core standards are really just things that a lot of us have to do daily simply to get by and save money. Except some of the people that are doing these things are making obscene amounts of money for making that cutesy little video about it. Which of course brings up the most glaring issue of performative sustainability. Social media platforms, especially ones like TikTok, thrive on visuals. It's easy to post a curated shot of a mismatched thrift find or a DIY project, but it's a lot harder to showcase the day-to-day discipline of living with less. So as a result, some critics feel that Underconsumption Core has become more about projecting an image of sustainability rather than actually practicing it. Like, I have clothing that's well over 15 years old now that I've had since high school or even before high school, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. This is somewhat normal and not something that I see as being noteworthy enough to brag about online for likes and praise. And of course, it's ironic that this is first and foremost a TikTok trend, you know, a platform that was never and will never be about consuming less. So that juxtaposition just sits a little bit funny with me. And while I personally appreciate the movement's efforts to push back on the otherwise over-consumptive buy pressure that you get all sides on TikTok especially anymore, I also feel like some people have lost the underlying point of this movement and used it as just another trending theme to guide their content curation. And this is ultimately why I think it's good practice to approach all trends with some degree of skepticism, because a lot of them have inherently consumerist or greedy ambition underscoring them, or were co-opted by those things, which I think is more the case in this case. I do think this one started out genuine and then it sort of lost the plot as it went. But here's the thing is even the minimalist and zero waste movements have not been exceptions to that, as we've explored in the past regarding whether or not the zero waste movement lied to us. If you missed that video, I recommend checking that out as well. So in the end, I personally don't think sustainability should be about curating an aesthetic. We shouldn't have to make consuming less a fun trend to convince people why it's a good idea. But at the same time, if it does encourage people to actually consume less, then it's a good thing. I mean, whatever works, I guess, right? Is Underconsumption Core truly a sustainable shift, or just minimalism rebranded for the TikTok age? Honestly, I think it's a little bit of both. And while it's refreshing to see a trend that challenges hyper-consumerism and highlights the fact that we as a collective need to rethink our consumption habits, we also need to stay mindful of its potential to become just another aesthetic. So, the real takeaway here is that sustainability is not about how it looks. It's about what works in your life. What do you think? Is Underconsumption Core a meaningful movement or just another internet buzzword? Let me know down in the comments and let's keep the conversation going. And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you found it helpful or interesting. So, until next time, this is Amber from SJ, signing off.